The Alternative Digitalk. Real issues, real talk.
Hi Rogers, can I ask you something?
Shoot.
What does corruption mean?
Well, summarily, corruption is abuse of public power for personal gain or for the benefit of a group to which one owes allegiance. For example, when a public office is abused by an official accepting or soliciting a bribe. By the way, private people can be corrupt too, like bribing police officers to escape fines.
Okay. So exactly how does that concern me?
Well, do you pay taxes?
I guess, yeah. What does that have to do with this?
Everything. Because those taxes you pay are supposed to facilitate services you use, like water, electricity, roads construction, medicines in hospitals, name it.
Okay, that is much bigger than I thought. But it can be stopped, right?
Well, yes it can, although it may not be as easy as it sounds. And here is the reason why. Corruption roots are grounded in our country's social, political, economic, bureaucratic traditions and policies.
So, what has kept it going this long? I mean, why don't we stop it?
Well, the main reason why it has been here for so long is because institutions are weak, either as a result of poorly defined ethical standards of public service, weak administrative and financial systems, or ineffective watchdog agencies.
What can we do to stop it?
At a national level, we must focus on strengthening the independence and effectiveness of public institutions that fight corruption. At a personal level, we must commit to never giving a bribe.
I promise I'll never give a bribe.
Well, that's a great decision you have made. Me and you now have to spread this message to all our friends. If we all do our part, corruption will be no more.
This message is brought to you by Alternative Digitalk.
Looking for a pair of shoes? Les Hub Stores has a wide range of selection for unisex footwear. We have the best quality of all brands at pocket-friendly prices and with neck deliveries countrywide. Just place your order or reach us on 0772 08 0090. You can also check up at Les Hub Stores on all our social media platforms. Les Hub, craft your own footprints.
Go to the church, though.
Tawali man, what's up?
Man, can you imagine people just dump everywhere? Someone drinks water and throws the bottle wherever.
Come on, Rogers. What else do you expect people to do with an empty bottle?
Simanya now, did you know that plastics take at least 450 years to decompose?
What? That's a long time.
Exactly. Because plastics are made out of a lightweight and flexible material that doesn't decompose easily. And plastics everywhere in the environment cause plastic pollution.
What is plastic pollution now?
It is the accumulation of plastic waste in the environment, like bottles, polythene bags, straws. All of these contribute to plastic pollution.
I have been using them without knowing their effect.
Yeah, a lot of people have. Plastics are a danger to the ecosystem, both on land and in water.
So how can we overcome this problem? Is there something we can do?
Oh yes, we can reduce by minimizing the use of plastics, reuse by repurposing them, or recycle by collecting and processing them into new products.
Everyone wants to change the world, but no one wants to change themselves for the world.
How about we change our habits for the world?
And it starts with me and you.
This message is brought to you by Alternative Digitalk. The Alternative Digitalk. Real issues, real talk.
A very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you to today's edition of the Hotline Show. My name is Roger Sturiawe, and as always, we have been blessed by the presence of our Honorable Ochieno Joseph, who's going to be talking to us about a number of issues. And today, we're going to be focusing mostly on peace and security, that from our local perspective here in Uganda, the terror alerts that have been happening and going around. How are we prepared to counter some of these issues? We're going to be going a little bit into the regional security and East African community regional force and their presence in Eastern Congo, if they have made any impact to this extent, and if the extension of their time does promise any benefits at all. And then we'll go to the peace and security generally of Africa and the coups that have been happening around and what that means for the whole continent as a whole, because a coup seems to be happening after another one, and it's becoming a trend. Is it something we should be expecting? We have had these things in the past. Do we learn from history? Is there something we have learned from history that we need to enforce and focus and capitalize on to make sure that we do have some democratic processes happening and good governance moving forward? So look at that. We'll also look at the G20, Africa being able to be admitted among those 20. I think it's now G21, since it has been made a permanent member of the G20. And so we'll look at that. What are the implications? What is it? What do we stand to benefit as a continent as a whole? But also, what is in it from each of the individual countries in Africa? In Africa, I think we have South Africa and then the whole of Africa. So what is it? What do we look forward to gaining from this, being a part of this economic cooperation with big economies in the world? So I'm going to invite Honorable Ochieno to just tell us, how have you been, first of all? How is the UPC? How have you been? How are the things happening on ground?
I'm well, thank God. UPC is sick, occupied, but absolutely the future. We are just sorting out some technical issues. On a serious note, I'm waiting still for the matter or the question of the leadership to be resolved, and I hope it's something that will happen soon. We've had to push for some activity in the recent past. So we hope that the leadership is resolved. But once that is done, of course, we've got a huge job, trying to reunite, remobilize, reorganize, demystify the myth that has been put against us, particularly by NRA in the last 30 or so years. So it's a difficult job. But as I continue around the country and every other opportunity that I get some very good messages and good hope and good vibes from the citizens of this country. I got a new member to the party yesterday, somebody who's young, beautiful, and 34, a fantastic graduate. The only thing, of course, was she said that although this is the party of her grandfather, so she knew the mother is rather mild in talk, but she did not know the great things that the party did until I had a 34 thereabout minutes conversation with her. So those are really the things that, so as a party, we are the best place for the future in terms of our programs, best place for the future in terms of our track record, and best place for the future in terms of a convictionist agenda. But of course, other parties would say whatever else that they would say. So that's as a party. But beyond that, I can't wait for that leadership to be resolved, and I hope that I'm as a leader to try and bring it together. But beyond that, I think this country needs opposition that is speaking the same language. So it will be very urgent for me, whoever that leader is. I hope it will be myself soon, and that we'll be able to engage with other political leaders, mainly in the opposition, to mainstream our thinking, to refocus, and to make sure that NRA does not continue with the impunity that is subjecting this country to in terms of looting of public resources, incompetent or mismanaging public resources, state capture, and the situation in which Mr. Museveni begins to think that he's Uganda, that it's all alpha and it's omega, and that if it's not him, then it must be his blood. And that is something that particularly the youth of this country must say no to. UPC needs to be able to help push that conversation forward. That said, I participated in a few fantastic events, including the wedding of my niece, very fantastic. I'll not go very personal, but it was one of the most exciting things in recent times. Unfortunately, on a sad note, I lost a godson. I lost a godson. I will not say too much, but my godson who's abroad, who's 19, was 19 and was going to university last week, meaning the week in which he died. It would have been a technicality matter, not locally here, somewhere else. It's a matter which is being investigated. I cried and I cried because one of these guys who I saw the mother and dad dance, and once in a while come and take tea with me in my place, or perhaps I'll pour for them a glass of nice drink. And so I saw the young man being born and come up, and so that's not particularly good news. So to lose a 19-year-old child, particularly one who's going to university, extremely clever, sharp and witty, that's sad. But beyond that, life has got to continue.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for making the time. I'm sorry about your godson. That's clearly not good news. And also, I want to apologize to our viewers for last week. We weren't able to have this show for some of the issues that were beyond our control. So we beg to apologize for that. And moving on, Honorable, I want to begin from the local context where we've had terror alerts happening all around. We've seen some of the attempts at bombs around town. I think a week or so ago, we had an incident at one of the churches in town. And most of it was coming from, we had received some alerts, travel alerts by some of the consulates and embassies around here, telling their citizens to be on alert when they move to public places. I wanted to pick your mind on what this says about our security, especially seeing as it's one of the sectors that we do invest the most in.
It's a very good question. I wish you're asking my good brother Felix Kuleiji, Museveni's military spokesperson, or someone from Museveni's state house. Those also eat most of our monies from Museveni's suits instead of our security. But no, you're absolutely right. Security takes a huge chunk of our national resources and has done so since Museveni came to power. Security takes a huge amount of our resources, and so therefore we would expect that these issues of terror or excessive insecurity should not arise. Security takes a huge amount of money because Museveni promised 20 years ago that he will professionalize security services, starting with the army, and once it's done, so he can go to take his milk in Rwachitura. So since he hasn't yet gone to Rwachitura, we could assume that he's still struggling with the resolving the question of national security. But that said, on a serious note, it's unfortunate, actually, that we should be talking terrorism in this country. But that said, I'm not particularly sure, and maybe correct me, I don't know when those alerts were made, and particularly if the bombs were defused, whether or not this regime has come out to state what the bombs were, what the details were, what security leads take them in terms of intelligence. So who are these people? Has that happened?
They did arrest a few people, suspects at that,
yes,
on that attempt at a church in town.
Yes.
And they are saying, of course, as always, that investigation is still ongoing. And we had the president come and give that State of the Nation address about security.
And said what?
Usually things we shall crush them. But also, they are calling on the people to also be alert in public places because this seems to be an issue that is continuous. It has happened before.
Yeah.
These alerts have happened time and again. But also, that sounds funny, especially when the spokesperson of the army told the people who were attending rallies of an opposition candidate that they cannot guarantee their security when they come to those crowds. So I do not know what that also means, especially since we are security savvy, as it appears.
I know that was itching you because I was going to come to that. Yes, I'm told that my good friend Felix Kuleiji said that he cannot guarantee the security of a rally, meaning a gathering of citizens of Uganda. It doesn't matter who. So if he can't do that, I think if it was some other places and perhaps it was a UPC government, such a person would resign, ask for the resignation in that post. And of course, not resign as an army, can continue going to protect Museveni in whatever way, but not in that public position, because I think that's quite insensitive. Number two, of course, then it's not Felix to answer this. It's very, very much. He's the defense chief, whoever it is. Do you know who the Museveni's new head of defense is? You know, whatever. But beyond that, ideally, the political leader is not necessarily even defense chief. Should actually be the Minister of Defense, should be making a statement. But beyond that, also Minister of Internal Affairs should be making a statement. If the soldiers, heads of security, say they cannot guarantee security to citizens, well, then what's their job? The number one role of a government, any government, including a regime like that of Museveni, is the number one responsibility is to protect the lives and property of the citizens. Yes. They don't have to be from Rwachitura. They don't have to be from Ruharu. They do not need to come from Tungamo, basically citizens of the Republic across this country. Number two, of course, as I understand it, they were making those references about rallies of supporters of my young brother, Robert Kyagulanyi. Kyagulanyi leads the largest, at the moment, in terms of numbers, opposition political party I don't know whether Chagulanyi has issued a statement, but they should, in my opinion, seek for an explanation from Mr. Museveni. Because that, as I said, is extremely responsible. I know these guys play the mind game, they exploit people's minds, and indeed they play fear games, and then they blackmail citizens. That's a blackmailing citizens of the Republic of Uganda that if you do not support NRA, then your life and property is not guaranteed. I think that is terrible.
That's true.
But also, on the other hand, you can't guarantee NUP rallies, but you follow Muhoozi and block roads for him when he's going to do his thing and when he's a soldier. You can't do that, but you can guarantee legislators sitting in Anita among his large living room in Bukedia. What then is this NRA thing? I think it's wrong, but then brings you back to this, that if these are the kind of way conversations which are being had, it's not surprising, therefore, that after 35 years we're still talking about insecurity and we're still talking about terrorism. But guess what? Terrorism in contemporary terms came out from the conflict, Arab-Israeli conflict, and at the time, particularly the Palestinians, they was associated with people who supported Palestinian liberation organizations and other organizations at the time, hijacked planes and possibly did bomb threats and things like that. I know that NRA has done also all those things too. Just like then, the nearest one later, when some of these guys started using some of those methods, including the Irish Republican Army, who was then seeking for the pushing away of the British from Ireland. Then you realize that in both of them are grievances, number one, and then two, in many cases, they're grievances which are political, and in many cases, they're grievances that people feel that there has been either no space, opportunity, or capacity, or interest to resolve them politically. So that's normally what would happen. Normally, of course, then you'd argue about America and many other countries that have faced terrorism in more recent times. What then would be the issues? In Uganda, you see them, they go to talk ADF. Genuinely, unless, and then what does ADF stand for? What are their grievances? We will not deal with terrorism exhaustively unless we deal with the underlying political grievances in the community. So it's ironic that Felix says that when possibly the most disgruntled political party organization at the moment in the country is NUP, because they're the ones who until now say and believe that the elections was rigged in their disfavor in the last times. And so if those are then the supporters that you're saying that you don't guarantee their security, then that is stretching people to begin to think through alternatives. I do have no association with any political party or organization except Uganda People's Congress. But this is a commonsensical thing, and of course my conversation is partly as a political leader, partly as a reasonable expert for some of these issues. Quite clearly commonsensical. You do not give people the opportunity to vent their anger or to express themselves. They look for other alternative means. As I said, I repeat, do we know what reasons we have for these terror threats in Uganda? Of course, then you'll find question of Congo, and Congo, is it just about going to Congo to do what? To loot their goals, to loot their timber, or indeed to build roads and schools in the interest of certain individuals, or indeed to support our Congolese brethren? That's not explained. Of course, granted, we are luckier than Rwanda that we don't get too many loud noises like people get in Congo. People get noise about Rwanda, but it's official. The Congolese believe that Rwanda and Uganda are exploiting and using their territory for their selfish needs. And that's why I've said before that if I were president tomorrow, I'll very urgently review what the role of Ugandan troops and Ugandan political establishments linked to anything to the situation in Congo, and I would be supporting them differently. But back onto this, whatever happens, terrorism is bad. And we as a party and as a government, and me as a Ugandan citizen, three ways: as a party, as a government, as an ordinary young Ugandan student, as a citizen in the 80s, we experienced and we saw the terror that the NRA subjected people of Uganda, including making people run in the streets of Kampala. So terrorism is bad. The NRA terror is bad, and any terror against NRA or anybody else is bad. So I think we should be looking for all other means by which we're able to resolve our conflicts rather than through terror or indeed violence. It's a responsible government then, as I say, to be much more clear and categorical about why and where these things are coming from. Sometimes, in the quick conclusion of this, sometimes citizens have also argued that some of these terror threats are stage managed, and they're used to push for a particular agenda, including political agenda. Granted, foreign countries do issue these statements, but at the end of the day, issue in terms of leader of intelligence rather than being authorities of who the initiators of this terror are.
And in the event that these issues do happen, because again, we are people who have invested heavily in security, and as seeing some of statistics
invested heavily in the name of security.
Seems, so it looks, as seeing some of the statistics, saying that Uganda, I think, and Rwanda have been one of the leading, in 2022, they imported quite a large amount of arms from Russia, amounting to about $48 million. And so I ask myself, with all of this investment, or so as it appears, do we not have all the resources we need to make sure that these things do not even happen in the first place?
To be fair to them, you don't necessarily fight terror with arms. You fight terror with diplomacy, you fight terror through dealing with the root cause of these things. But most importantly, you fight terror through intelligence. And the intelligence that you apply will not normally be intelligence guys, waving those heavy guns that Museveni and his son, run around in the streets of Kampala. I don't know sometimes which terror they encounter. If there's some bad guys around Kampala doing some bombs and explosive, it will be intelligence, and the intelligence that will do that, they don't need those arms from Russia. Actually, the money that buys those arms should be the ones to train them, perhaps feed them, and also create an enabling environment in which they're able to get this. But also on the other, as I said, if citizens get the services that they so desire, they're unlikely to begin to think of other means, including violence and terror, on the one hand. But number two, if then citizens are happy generally, then any infiltration in their communities by, quote, bad elements, they'll be exposed and ejected. That's what I'm trying to say. So soft diplomacy is really really the answer to this. But that said, you're right that we shouldn't be spending money for arms in Rwanda, rather to Russia, when the potholes in Kampala are worse than when the last time Muhoozi was around town. And that I know somebody who lost a relative within the last 1 week, also again, I must say, through in child labor, and it was directly and as a result of the absence of any average basic health care in this country. I also know that within the last 1 week, I have met somebody who failed to go complete their university. They stopped at the second semester because of school fees. But I also know somebody who's got who had an A in mathematics and got all principal passes without failing any paper. But that person is about to become an LC1 chairperson somewhere in the East, simply because he's a boy who would not afford fees. Getting an A in mathematics, getting, I think, 13 points in total for the combination that he did, and is walking the streets. That would never have happened under UPC. It's actually a shame that that happened under NRA. And such a person is walking the streets. That's the person for whom resources for equivalent of what buys one equipment of those armament from Russia should be able to cater for.
And I wanted to get this one again, the last one. I'll certainly bring it back in the African context. But before we leave this issue, with the prevailing imbalances, and there's, of course, the structural bottlenecks, the structural impunity and predatory security sector, how do you think as citizens of Uganda, because at the end of the day, like you have mentioned, sometimes the will is not there from those that are in the current administration. How do we as people protect ourselves then? Especially if someone like that comes out and says, you know what, I cannot guarantee your security just because you are supporting a different agenda.
I'm not clear about the question, but I think, yeah, what's the question again?
No, what I mean is, in light of now the statement like Kraija made.
From Felix, yes.
Yes, from Felix. And
How do we deal with
that? Looking at the culture and structure bottlenecks and structure
All right,
impunity and all of that, how do we deal with this now?
No, I think it's important that you raise that. It's a shame, really, in this country that we do not have political leadership that befits this nation. We don't have the leadership from the top. We have some very old, tired man called Mr. Museveni who's imposed, and he's not really caring. So his job is basically to survive and basically keep his power. Because if he was, culturally, such a thing certainly would not be made at all. That's the point. But number two, then, the political parties and opposition, I think one of the last things we discussed here was the state of political parties, opposition political parties. Yes. If the mainstream opposition parties, and sometimes maybe I'm harsh on my colleagues, if the mainstream opposition parties were slightly much more effective, and if they're possibly slightly much more united, this is one of the things that they should have picked and run with. And you don't pick and run with it for a headline for 1 or 2 days. You pick and run with it to the end and also demand from the authorities as be that must be. And maybe I might even drop a WhatsApp message to a note to Felix, for instance, myself, because come to think of it, I haven't done it. But my former office is still being held by the courts, and maybe with Mr. Museveni, which is a shame. But no, there should be much more noise made by the political parties. Number two, you, the media, should be calling out this guy. In fact, Felix should have been in the headlines, in the frontline pages for all the major newspapers in the last 1 week. It was like that, whether or not because that's the structure calling out, and then public opinion, and then of course in Uganda, Museveni invests more in penalty than in research, because maybe Makerere University Institute for Social Research, for argument's sake, would have capacity to do public opinion polling, overnight. And maybe you'd be saying, and sometimes even main television networks can do straw polls, as they call them. And they will tell you what public opinion is about what this guy said, what Felix said, or what proportion of the citizens support the government, and things like that. Opinion polls are a matter of routine. They're very, very important. I noticed that they hardly hear, and there's some funny organizations come up leading to elections, then they do these things. And even releasing one result sometimes takes an editor to resign, when people manage to exchange hands. Did you do it correctly or not? So neither here nor there. So, but structurally we are very weak as a nation state. So I'm not quite sure whether there is any other way to deal with this than for people to lament. And after the end of this week, people will forget, and then Felix will be the most popular soldier, because he, at the end of his speeches he prays. And when he says, with that praise, when he says Jesus, some people think, he's next to Jesus, that's my man. And then, kind of, you get it.
Yes, I do.
No, but I really, it should be calling out by those agencies I talked about. Again, in democracies, the police commission would come out to clarify. You see? Because as I said, national security is the responsibility of this police to talk about. Yes. Anyway, not the army. But when an army person comes like that, the police should be able to come out and sort of sweep their mess.
I hope they do. And to move on, I want to, and I'm glad you did hint on it earlier, about the regional security now, especially the question of the DR Congo and the Eastern Congo, and how we stand right now. In November of last year, 2022, the East African community, as it is, did agree to form a regional force and decided, we need to sort of send some sort of security in that region to help the president and all of that, and the country as a whole to stabilize and push out all of those insecurities that are happening there. From now, almost a year, originally they were supposed to be there for 6 months. And then they extended for, I think, more 3 months, which duration was ending, I think, 2 weeks ago or last week, if I'm not mistaken. And they had to push it again up to December of this year. For the period we have been there, even up to now, before we go to what we intend to achieve in the next extended period, do you think there's something to celebrate, or is there something to show in this previous period?
You're the journalist. You should be telling the nation through me
Yeah,
that
yeah.
in the last 12 months, these have been the achievements. But anyway, to help you with that, since you gave me a cup of tea earlier, I want to say to you that, look, no, we don't know anything, do we? You know, and I think that's the challenge. Quite clearly, these organizations resolving matters in Congo, I don't see it happening soon. Because as you rightly say, we don't know what these guys have achieved. I don't remember a major news headline about this. Some people will say that because we did not get headline because it was good news. No, not at all. This is a fight process. I think what the East African leaders needed to have done is to help, and I suggested it at the time, that they need to support Congo by pushing Congo towards a national settlement. Congo needs all political parties. Just like Uganda, Congo needs an urgent national conference involving all political players and possibly actually a national conference, almost like Odessa or South Africa, post-apartheid, that may then also include the armed groups because you want to talk about grievances. There are people who are really salivating for Eastern DR Congo to break away. Yeah. And it's very cheeky because most of them keep on telling you lies that they're Pan-Africanists. I'm actually genuinely not sure whether the breakup of Congo, even if it was not going to serve some dubious interests outside the borders, is necessarily the answer. I think we need much more unity rather than a division. And Congo just needs to be helped to politically come to a consensus. Congo basically just needs a strong leadership at the top, and Congo needs to be able to mobilize its resources so that it's able to begin to invest, particularly in infrastructure in Eastern Congo, so that Eastern Congo can become a much more mainstream part of Congo, meaning that Goma and Kinshasa is like Gongera and Kampala, although Rwachitura might say, okay, and Rwachitura like, no, that is really what these guys need. And so beyond that, linked to your other question, once that has been done, these guys need to feel that they're part of the Republic of Congo, that the resources go to infrastructure, resources go to education, resources go to health, and that the possibilities of guys from the East to relate with people from the West in that simplistic way. That really what that country needs, and that most of the national resources go into the hands of the pocket. And the more that happens, the more we should be able to drop the UN guys. I think they should pack their bags and leave Congo very fast. And at that stage, East African authorities need to be helping Congolese to build capacity, internal capacity, rather than sending timber brokers, and gold miners to those places, whether armed or unarmed. That's sort of part of the problem. And if that continues, the Congo that we had problems with in the 60s will still be the Congo that we have issues with, when you become a gray-haired man like I am now. In the 60s, UPC supported the Lumumbist forces after killing of Patrice Lumumba, and our job then was to build capacity for the Lumumbist liberation forces rather than to serve as their foot soldiers. But that really is what is needed. At the moment, I'm not quite sure whether these visits by those guys are going to make any difference.
And now I want to also put it in light with the region as a whole. We have had insecurity, I don't know if you should call it insurgency, or let's just say insecurities, We have one in Sudan here. Okay, we can say that is central, but there's South Sudan, which is literally a part of the community, but also has its own issues. We have issues that have happened for almost, if not over a decade in Somalia. We've had really issues around the region. Do you think the community, the bloc, the East African community as a whole, is it really contributing to conflict resolution?
No, because they're part of the problem.
How so?
They're part of the problem. South Sudan, many people in South Sudan believe Mr. Museveni is the problem. Many people in South Sudan believe Mr. Uganda is the problem. But also many people in South Sudan who work with Mr. Museveni think he's a deputy god, kind of stuff. But that's honestly the case. And then there's some people in Sudan, meaning South Sudan, who are actually part of the problem is Kenya. But less of it is basically Uganda. So no, we are net contributor to some of the problems in South Sudan. So how can we become a solution? South Sudan is again another very, very unfortunate case. I lost some sleepless nights because of South Sudan. We have suffered in African liberation. Yes, South Sudan, I've lost some sleep on you. But the other day I met, by this, as a matter of interest, I better say this. I met a South Sudanese diplomat. Why should I say this? I better say it. I met a South Sudanese in a car, and so it's a diplomatic car, and it was parked next to my car. And I basically went to this individual to say hello to them, And by this was a bit of a time when it's not even one of those that was even intended to identify myself, particularly if they didn't know me, I was just being nice to this individual. This individual went by, said, people and power. But anyway, so no, following the death of Garang and since then, that country has struggled and has suffered. Their conflicts is also one of those that people just forgot. It's just now ironical that Sudan is much more looking messy than South Sudan itself. This African community of the original three, Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania, by the time they started expanding, they themselves were not reconciled, and so the expansion has been at the whims of a few individuals rather than engaging community citizens. And so I'm not sure what East African community he would be referring to, that diplomats from Goma going to sort out the issue in Toriti. It will not happen. No, but if it were, it would be the case that a strong Arusha would issue a statement that bothers anybody in Juba. It doesn't. When did you ever hear Arusha issue a statement on beating up opposition guys in the streets of Kampala, let alone insurgents? So it's neither here nor there. It brought us to part of the wider conversation that we might have about the urgent leadership crisis on the continent, where some of these coups are now turning up because there are no alternatives, there are no spaces for people. If then, of course, then institutionally the respective countries are not neither here nor there. If there's a strong leader who had the respect, it would help. Mr. Museveni is the longest serving. Some people revere him, those people whom he once in a while helps, at the expense of Ugandans, and he knows what I'm talking about. But he's really not necessarily interested in the stability of these countries. He normally does this out of his own interest. The expansion of East Africa, the region of East Africa, and maybe we should go back to that. We should dissolve East Africa, then start again, Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania. So if Rwanda wants to join, then we have what they call the convergence criteria. So to join East African community, one, you must have, say, democratic elections, maybe 3 terms following, three election cycles, rather, terms. Maybe then you must not have been reported to Human Rights Watch 3 times. You must be spending no less than 9% of your annual GDP to education, and no less than 12% to health, and you must make sure that you don't export to terror-backing countries, and you must not have a relationship, say, with a terror nation. Criteria. And that maybe your economy must be growing at a particular rate per annum in order to meet the criteria to join this bloc. You see what I'm saying? Or you must not have more than 0.0% of your citizens in Luzira sitting for nothing, kind of stuff. No, seriously, and these are all very important things. And at that stage, you qualify. By the nations before, like these things about Turkey coming to join the EU, NATO, Greece, that's what they do, But all of a sudden, you wake up and then you're two presidents, and maybe your wives share sisters, and then the other, whatever kind of stuff. And then, when we do this, their goal is going to come, let's do it. No, it's just a laughing thing, really. So that's the original East African. The original East African community was so powerful that the European community, which was then called European Economic Community, built themselves on our image. Did you know that? Have I told this program? The European community, which is then the European Economic Community at the time called EEC, built itself on the basis. They bought our ideas and worked on our criteria of the East African community, which was then founded. Respect Milton Obote. People can go and hang. Respect Milton Obote, respect Julius Nyerere, and respect who? Jomo Kenyatta. Yeah, no, those are fantastic guys. Fantastic. And Milton Obote, respect that guy, man. It was up to you. Jesus will listen. So no, these guys did this thing. And now Ted Heath, it's official. Ted Heath, then the British Prime Minister, one of the first few magazines I had the privilege to have when I went to London by force. Ted Heath said that, he said officially that they formulated the easy thing, they bought some of these things for it. But number two, that they worked against the East African community. That's the more important point to go from Ted Heath. That they worked against the East African community because if the East African community succeeded, it was going to be too difficult for them to penetrate. So you see where I'm going. So then East African community of those three, successful as they were, I was telling another program on this actually, not your program, I'm telling another network on this question of the stability of these countries. We had the East African Railways and Harbours headquarters, I think, Nairobi. We had the East African Airways Corporation, and this had the flying schools. Then you have East African Port Authorities. Then, so Dar es Salaam hosts one, Nairobi hosts one, Kampala hosts another, kind of stuff. And then we're moving towards one nation state kind of stuff. And we're working closely, and it was, then these bandits came and broke it. So if then that had happened, then by the time a new nation, in this case arguably say Rwanda or Burundi is coming, then you say, what's the criteria? Do you begin to speak English? All of these colonial languages or French or whatever. But basically, what criteria? What you have to meet a certain threshold in order to join the community. You could possibly argue that, well, you're going to teach Swahili, to your primary schools for the next 7 years, before you join, Now, it's only then whether you do that, then you begin to say that, well, if Congo is joining, why is it joining? When you're having that discussion, UPC must have a position, DP must have a position, NUP must have a position, NRA bandits or NRA political party must have whatever the case. So you say, why I say the bandit element of it, say, look, because you could argue, NRA can say, look, for us, we're a revolutionary political organization. We want Congo because, if they do that, it will give us a cushion to conquer the rest of Africa. You know what I'm saying? You have to argue this. But most importantly, while political parties are doing that, citizens are involved. So members of UPC know that we support the expansion of the community, one. Or number two, we support Burundi joining East African community for reasons A, B, C, D.
Yes.
So
that's if it comes at a nomination of one of the member states.
Indeed. So you'd have these conversations. So by the time then, maybe this thing goes to the national parliament. It becomes a national parliament for debate. These things have been, all citizens, by and large, have been involved in this. And then expansion of the community, you could possibly even argue that these are things for which there's a referendum. You know, should they join or not? But of course, referendum normally take place in the respective countries. The changes, the constitutional changes, are so important that to say, remember that the East African community is part of the argument is that they want to go and have one quote, one president, one leader. So imagine you take a country like Congo, you know, they join the East African community, and in 3 years' time, their president is only like the governor of Equatorial, because the overall president is President. No. He's president of Tanzania. What's her name?
Suluhu Samia.
Yeah, Samia. I wanted the word Samia for a reason. President Samia is the president of East Africa. I'm rooting for her to be the first president. Now you guys are going to say I'm not patriotic. You know, kind of stuff. So no, then you say, because some people in the Congo might say, she's a woman, and then some, you know, unkind Christians would say, oh, she's a Muslim, she cannot be our president. Or then, oh, she's a woman, kind of, you know what I'm saying? But these are conversations that are taking place in Congo. So Congolese, by the time they've gone through a referendum and the vote is yes, when this thing is tabled, you know, and ideally this thing should be tabled as the East African community first, and then the General Assembly does it, and then the heads of state come and ratify. Something along those lines. You have involved the citizens, and you've come out of the community, which is a community of one peoples. Now, granted, for me, I'm one peoples with all my brethren in Nigeria. That I have no doubt, because I believe my brethren in Haiti are all of us. But this thing that the colonial authorities came and broke us in pieces, when are we brothers, you and me? Or when am I your uncle? Like you, sometimes you don't like calling me your uncle, you know. And when are you that boy from Chiboga, kind of stuff, you know. And where's Chiboga? Because part of the national conversation taking place, I'm told, was some statement my good brother Robert made about voting and people being taken in different governments. So when are we some of these things? So such a community would be one in which a member state, you can see with a crisis, we all coming together because we understand. Right now, I have asked, I genuinely do not know what the core objects of the East African community are. Of course, I'm a researcher, I can do it very quickly.
Apart from the integration?
I genuinely don't know. I genuinely don't know. And I don't know what the biggest agenda is. Now, I don't know how many of your viewers knows the name of the chairperson of the Secretary General of the South African community. I don't know how many of your viewers know the current Speaker of the South African Legislative Assembly. I don't know how many of your members know how many legislators are from Uganda, how many are from Kenya, and how many are from Tanzania. And I'm making it lighter because I'm not even counting the other countries. So I don't know how many of them know. And then finally, I don't know how many of your viewers can name properly, like Joseph Ochieno Esquire, a member of the East African Legislative Assembly from Uganda. Do you get it?
Yes.
Now, if that's not the case, I want to tell them, and I want to tell them, I don't want to invoke jealousy from you. When I was in primary school, it's a bit of a different topic, but still to them, we could tell from the Minister for Education, including Minister in a means time. You know the Minister of Education, but like Akili, whatever, Karavara, Minister of Defense, all the ministers, and you know, and you almost cram it. I'm telling something else about NR, because NR ministers, you can't tell because their numbers are taught of Bible books, you know, I mean, Bible pages, so they're too long, you know, and some of them are sneaked in, they become ministers, some of them, the following day, they've got Mabati and they're elsewhere, kind of stuff. So you don't know. But point is, you know, that's because of the instability of the whole thing. But I'm just saying, East African community, away from NR cabinet, how many? It tells you how bad the situation is. Now, I am not having an informal conversation. It's a very serious issue because the institutional building around East Africa, you talking institutions the other day, are much earlier, are very important. So even as a nation state, we can't deal with many of these things. And as a community, we can't. So which authority will this African community have? Yes. And what effect, what impact will it have on whatever's happening in Khartoum? You know, these warmongers in Khartoum, you know, do they have time to listen to who? You know what I'm saying? They will not. So I think as Africans, we need to wake up. And you young Africans, I keep on saying, Rogers, every time I come to your program, I come to talk to young guys. Young guys, you wake up and begin to ask hard questions, begin to challenge your political leaders. Young guys begin to get much more interested in leadership. I know some of you guys once in a while send me notes that I'm your role model. And I hope you once in a while pick one or two things that you want to run with. Because at the end of the day, the state in which we are as a country, and as a continent, and as a peoples, meaning African peoples, whether the African peoples in Brazil, the African peoples in Haiti, the African peoples in Jamaica, I think our state as a relative, as a race, is not particularly exciting. And considering that we are the ones, as citizens and owners of the largest, the richest continent in the world, and we continue to be treated as fourth-class citizens globally, it is terrible. In conclusion, linked to that is possibly not surprising that you're asking me what community leaders can do in Khartoum, and I've not given you an answer. And one of the reasons I've not given you an answer is the answer I've given you, meaning that we are in such a mess as a people, as an identity, and particularly because we have such a crisis in terms of leadership that whether institutional, structural, or even a big guy leader in this Uganda, forget about NRA, forget about UPC, forget about any other political party, which Ugandan citizen can come from, because he can be a member of any of those political organizations. Who can you say is real and elder Uganda? I know some people are now looking for their grandfathers because they go to go special relation with their grandfathers. But you know what I'm trying to say? Once in a while, people used to throw names. In the days of Nabuderes, of course, he was arrested. Is it Ugola? Just Ugola? This is what I'm trying to talk about. Is there some retired cardinal? If it was some cardinal, can you count? You get what I'm saying? Yes. No, I know. Is it Bishop Ochola? Going towards that, they will say now Ochieno is talking about his old person because the northern. No, you guys, I'm not a northern from the east. No, you pick the Bishop Odama or Ochola kind of stuff. I'm leading you to this. Reason is because they're retired religious leaders, but you know that they've engaged in an attempted peace process. I'm bringing you to where you are, and you know that they've managed to successfully engage maybe cross-culture, cross-religious, and in many cases possibly they've gone ahead and talked to their enemies or people from the other side and tried to bring people together. I'm not saying that those guys don't exist in Nagongera. Nana has just come into my mind, but chaps, please don't deny me my citizenship. I'm saying as a nation, we really don't have many of those people. Now, as a sub-region, as a community, do we have some of those ones? As an eminent delegation? Of course, if you say Museveni, you send an eminent delegation of Rugunda and Babazi, to go and represent, but it will be, they'll be represent some kind of interest. Yes. So no, unfortunately, Sudan may have to wait longer for East African community to sort out this problem. Sudanese people need to rise up and mobilize and organize to sort out their own internal problem. And unfortunately, I want to say, younger Sudanese need to get up. Thankfully, in Sudan, the political parties and organizations tend to be much more deeper, much more sharper. They need to be allowed to be part of the process of negotiated settlement that will push these military guys to pull back a bit to allow for a pro-restoration in which the Sudanese people can once again have a leader with their mandate.
And before you go in a very short commercial break, I wanted to just get to this. In your opinion, the East African community does not serve any purpose as it stands right now?
I don't know what it does. That's all I'm saying. I don't know what the East African community does. And for me, particularly, who's been a member of the East African community of the three, I don't know anything else special that exists today that did not exist at the time. Museveni, thanks to UPC and the East African community of the day, went and studied for free in Dar es Salaam, thanks to UPC money. I don't know how many. You get what I'm trying to say? I don't even know whether there's in a structured, and of course somebody can correct me on this, in a structural East African cooperation arrangement around education, in a structured East African arrangement and on research or health. I don't know. Even the railways that they broke. By the way, somebody needs to go to prison because of railways, The railways that they broke, At least those ones were there as part of East African Railways and Harbours Cooperation. By the way, the passenger trains that stopped, they used to roar. You guys from Chiboga, you never saw this thing. Yes, so that's why I'm traumatized. The train used to settle from Kampala to Nairobi, Oh, it was roaring like nothing. It's fantastic stuff. But this is African thing here. Now they talk about standard gauge, so we don't know which money between Ruto and Museveni. We don't know.
The standard gauge levy. Okay, we're going to go in for a very short commercial break, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for still being a part of the conversation. We do get a thing every single time I do have this gentleman on part of the show. I am literally in class. There's a lot of things I do learn, and I do appreciate him just as much as every one of you. And I hope that you do get one or two things, and that you do also spread it across. And that is why I'm going to call upon every one of you to be able to share this show and add the link with your friends. We can learn one or two things. If you have a question about any of these issues, you can put it in the comment section, or if you do watch this show after it has ended, you can still send in your question. In the following show, we'll be able to follow up and see which questions were not addressed, and then we can see if you can get some answers. So we're going to go in for a very short commercial break. When we come back, we'll still be talking about peace and security now in the African context as a whole, but also in about the economic perspective of the G20 and what it is that is in it for Africa. Let's come back.
The Alternative Digitalk. Real issues, real talk.
Go to the church, though.
Tawali man, what's up?
Man, can you imagine people just dump everywhere? Someone drinks water and throws the bottle wherever.
Come on, Rogers. What else do you expect people to do with an empty bottle?
Simanya now, did you know that plastics take at least 450 years to decompose?
What? That's a long time.
Exactly. Because plastics are made out of a lightweight and flexible material that doesn't decompose easily. And plastics everywhere in the environment cause plastic pollution.
What is plastic pollution now?
It is the accumulation of plastic waste in the environment, like bottles, polythene bags, straws. All of these contribute to plastic pollution.
I have been using them without knowing their effect.
Yeah, a lot of people have. Plastics are a danger to the ecosystem, both on land and in water.
So how can we overcome this problem? Is there something we can do?
Oh yes, we can reduce by minimizing the use of plastics, reuse by repurposing them, or recycle by collecting and processing them into new products.
Everyone wants to change the world, but no one wants to change themselves for the world.
How about we change our habits for the world?
And it starts with me and you.
This message is brought to you by Alternative Digitalk.
Looking for a pair of shoes? Less Up Stores has a wide range of selection for unisex footwear. We have the best quality of all brands at pocket-friendly prices, and we make deliveries countrywide. Just place your order or reach us on 0772 08 0090. You can also check up at Less Up Stores on all our social media platforms. Less Up, craft your own footprints.
The Alternative Digitalk. Real issues, real talk.
Welcome back from that short commercial break, ladies and gentlemen. My name again is Roger Stuyabwe, and I am here with Honorable Ochieno Joseph, talking about a number of issues that have been happening currently or recently across the country as it is, the region as East Africa. We're also going to go into the continent as a whole, and of course, how we play into the global space. And we're going to be beginning from the African perspective, Honorable. And I want to begin from the coups that have been happening. We have a fresh one that just happened this very month, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the one in Gabon, Ali Bongo being hosted. We had one in July in Niger. We had one last year. We had the Guinea, we had the Mali, we had, I think, one of them in Chad, we had one in South Sudan. We had a lot of things happening really across the continent. What do you think is fueling all of these conflicts and coups across the continent?
It's predominantly public discontent. It's predominantly public discontent because I think as a counter to the neoliberal agenda of the early 90s, where the Western governments, particularly through their their fronts, the IMF and World Bank, pushed economic reforms in Africa, but their agenda was basically to push their frontmen like Museveni to help them extract and mine off African resources. So as part of those ones, African governments were compelled and persuaded to privatize some of their public institutions, and at the same time to sell off public assets, and in many other cases to outsource their responsibilities as governments to private systems and authorities, and in many cases to sell off for cheap our resources. In Uganda's case, I'll just use one example because of time, that UPC built for you guys a Uganda commercial bank very successfully, and then Museveni and his fellow revelers went ahead and sold it.
And ones that were actually made also almost at the same time. KCB in this instance, one of Kenya Commercial Bank still lives today.
And that's a very interesting point you're making, because Uganda Commercial Bank, the thriving bank of East Africa at the time, in terms of the public ownership bank, public-owned banks, was sold, and it was sold to a Boer bank called Stanbic. Stanbic is now thriving like nothing at our expense. It's making a huge amount of profit at our expense, and those profit is being siphoned abroad. When Uganda Commercial Bank was not actually profit, I know Museveni was jealous. It was not going to go to him and his family like sometimes it goes, but it was going to the pockets of Ugandans, meaning as a public organization. It's criminal what these guys did in many cases. But while that continued, and then they outsourced the responsibility of, say, education and health, and then brought private motive profit basically to sit into these. Their agents became perfect partners in this. So you find a dubious American, a dubious Pineti coming and doing deals side by side with some Ugandan front to do their things. But while they did that, a few individuals became very rich. A few individuals built malls. A few individuals drove cars. A few individuals sent their sons, and sometimes not particularly clever sons, abroad to go and study in big schools at your expense, and then they come back and boast, in swimming pools, But while that was happening, public schools, meaning the schools that made people like myself, including Museveni, even Museveni was made, So the public schools like the Mwiris, the Nabsusas, the Choru girls of this world were sunk and being neutralized. I can't believe that even these days, in terms of ratings, you can't hear about Namilyengo College. The other day I was at Namilyengo Road for a public function. These were, in my year actually going to Makerere, the best art student came from Namilyengo College. The best art student for A-level that year. So these public institutions, public schools sunk, and private for-profit institutions rose, meaning people's money. And in theory, some Ugandans think that they're basically making money. But no, excess capitalism, pushed by IMF and World Bank and their masters, were perfecting the art. So right now you have a situation in which, as I said, the state has outsourced that responsibility. I saw something very interesting. Some legislators now join these health camps. So they mobilize doctors and health professionals to go to particular districts to offer free medical services to the electorate. And people clap. Now, the point is that is, for those who do that, and one or two of them who've done that recently are my friends. I don't want to mention their names, but one or two of them are my friends, and generally good legislators, But that is actually not what legislators should be doing. Legislators should be making sure that when it comes to budgetary allocations, health gets its appropriate amount of money. But when health gets appropriate, what money does health get and for what? Health should be getting money for infrastructure. Health should getting money for wages. Health should get money for equipment. And health should get money for everything else. When we talk about infrastructure, includes the public hospitals and the dispensing facilities, and including staffing and fleet. That's what health should be doing. Meaning, therefore, if health is getting that, why take a health camp? You know, it's not necessary. It's not necessary. So basically, citizens who are now clapping for these people, thinking that these are their deputy gods, you know, when you fall sick, like we have headache here, we just go to the nearest health facility in Kawempe, and public health facility in Kawempe. And I keep on repeating this. In the event that you're posh enough not to go and be seen in the same queue with Mr. Ochieno, and you want to go for your private health and you can afford it, that's fine. But generally, any citizen and every citizen should be able to go to a local health facility and, be seen, be assessed, be examined, be prescribed, get medicine free at the point of entry. Health services like the UK's National Health Service, which UPC bought this idea from and we successfully did here. One of the things that they did, and the main opposition party is playing heavy on this, is what they call public health services free at the point of delivery. Usually, the nearest profit element is this, that when you're in well-paid employment, like you, and you hit a certain threshold, you are not, and you go for prescription. Prescription is standard, so which is something which is a bit of an anomaly, but it's a subject being reviewed. That prescription could, for example, be equivalent of, I think at the moment it's about 50,000 shillings, for argument's sake, prescription. So people who don't pay for prescription and people who are not employed or earning a certain threshold. But so if you're beyond a certain threshold, you pay for your prescription. But that is if you go to see your local doctor and then they've said you've got conditions A, B, C, D, and this is the medication. Now, the prescriptions, I may be boring you, but I think it's important.
No, it's okay.
The prescriptions are such that your doctor might prescribe 5 drugs. You pay the same amount of money. And this is normally that's why they're being investigated. Or they prescribe one element of drugs. You pay for it. Or they own antibiotics. Antibiotics, by the way, guys, antibiotics are not supposed to be picked from the counter. In UK and under UPC government, you will not be picking antibiotics on the counter, meaning you go to a health facility. Antibiotics should be prescribed. So you should go to a doctor, should prescribe for it. So once it's prescription medicine is paid for by you hitting a certain threshold. So most of the people who pay for prescriptions, the prescription fee equivalent is no money. You see? So basically health services are free. Number 2, most importantly, you could be someone as rich as, who's the rich average Ugandan here who's not indigenous Ugandan without prejudice? Not
Vitature.
Is he genuinely rich and himself?
I think Vitature is doing fair.
Yeah, Vitature. So Vitature, when Vitature falls sick and he goes, he finds him in Itojo Hospital built by UPC, and Vitature goes down there, he gets seen, gets an operation, gets whatever, everything else. All the medication being given to you while you're in a hospital, as a patient, inpatient, you don't pay for it. So the prescription medicine that you pay for it is when you've gone home, and normally they also give you all the medicine. When it's finished, then you ask your doctor, that's when you begin to pay for it. So that's the kind of health service. So basically, generally, relatively free health service. In Norway, it's better, even better. Oh, Norway. By the way, do you know that in Norway? Do you know something that happened in Norway last month?
No.
In Norway, they've gone so far that buses and trains are free.
Public transport.
Yes. So now in Norway, I think it became effective September actually. So you can go anywhere using a bus or a train, but you don't pay a penny.
Nothing.
Nothing.
Like, nothing.
Nothing like Z. Not Kasai that shh over the Mabati. No, Z. Ochieno says no, Z. Now, you can see how far these countries are. Maybe I'm going around a bit. These guys are saying the more government will pay for public transport, it means you leave your cars at home.
Yes.
You see?
Yeah.
It means that there's climate change thing, environmental things,
There's a bit of
whatever, the
mitigation,
pollution
yeah.
thing, whatever. Not there. That's what governments do. Leadership.
So-
Africa security. So because we're talking security, I thought I would sneak in there a context of our livelihood, which is basically our health. Because they're all related in a particular way. So that's how governments are going. So when they talk about their national security, they're not talking about whose girlfriend is a member of whichever team. No. They're talking national security in a holistic way, so it's about health, education, and people's ability to possibly economically be independent and sustainable. And that's how far they're going. Uganda, Kampala is the most polluted capital city in Africa. Did you know that?
One of them, but they're also trying to rank
Not
Nairobi,
one of them.
Nairobi close to it.
No. You really want to throw words. It's not about Nairobi. Kampala is the most polluted capital on the African continent. I don't know the second one, I don't know the third one, that's not the point. And Nairobi can then tomorrow become the second 0.5. I'm simply saying Kampala is the most polluted capital city in Africa. Did you know that?
I did, but as for currently, I'm not quite sure about that.
No, then you say you don't know, but I'm telling you it is, because it's official coming from me.
I knew, but I thought we had been overrun by some other city.
No, and in terms of towns, national capital is the highest. In terms of cities, I think is the second. There's some city in West Africa which is highest, but not a capital. But as a capital city, Kampala is number one. Now, that is extremely shameful. Museveni killed our trains, he killed our buses. Did you know that there used to be a bus to Kawempe? Uganda transport bus to Kawempe? No. Did you know there was the one that used to go to Lozira?
From town, city center?
Yes.
No.
And to Zambia. Yeah?
I don't think I found any public transport.
No, you did not find. Of course, you did not find. Yeah. That's how long Museveni has been around. So since you were born. No, but I'm saying this. So these are all numbers, and they're now all linked to health. I've got a friend of mine, a medical doctor, who's a Ugandan who went to Budo, and is now serving other countries because of Museveni's thing, The guy, whenever he comes, he says he cannot stay in Kampala for 2 days because he falls sick, ironically. His body system has just gone on to these things about pollution.
And Honorable, if you look, and I'm going to go a little bit about, again, the insecurity at the continent as a whole. And I do appreciate the fact that some of the underlying issues that have caused some of those problems, those just lack of basic resources. If people cannot get what they need, if people cannot get their children go to school, if they cannot fall sick and be assured that there's going to be some health care, those are some of the things that do cause that. But is it also possible that some of the insecurities that have happened across the continent also have been fueled by external interests, and as such, our own countries have not much capacity to counter some of
I was coming to that, but it's very interesting because when you say about the insecurity, I was going to, fortunately, you're not presenting it as terror, because terrorism confines insecurity, limits it, and sometimes makes it very simplistic. But that's what we started with. And we started with example of the Arab-Israeli conflicts, and then examples of the British thing with the Irish. But interesting with security, before I answer you there, but before I go into that, phone thefts. I saw from social media the other day, a friend lost a phone, another friend lost a phone when they've been stolen, and I saw a friend swearing about phones. So basic theft, still related to security. Many times, crime, generally, which includes terror, is tend to be related to the less democratic, open, a society is, the less open a society and community is, the higher the level of unemployment, the less literacy in a country, the perceived or real, but in many cases, real absence of centers of justice, including your inability to go to the police and the police respond properly, let alone police is responsible to counter, insecurity threats. The inability by the citizens to get due recourse to the law, meaning that you go to court and then you're able to get your matters resolved judiciously and fairly, those will tend to link with the more state of insecurity, as we call it. Will be anyway. Law and order, in many cases, is normally linked to into unemployment and economic disparities. So it's basically merely common sense. Because the guys who normally then be involved in all these other things, including terror, will be guys with grievances, and in many cases will be guys with whose economic status is neither here nor there. People have argued about Osama bin Laden, but that's slightly different. That's much more ideological. That which then links me to these other things. Of course, some of the terror things on the continent generally include the coups that you talk about in the Sahel. Many of them will link them to the Islamist forces, and then some of them even link them to the breakdown of Libya, and so therefore proliferation of armament and different kind of armed groups, across that sub-region, and of course then the grievances that many, Muslims do have and feel about Anglo-America and meaning the global North, and some of their roles, which basically Anglo-America, which basically Europe and North America, and their roles in many of these other things. But of course, much more recently, some of the grievances involving the disputes between Russia and NATO, called the nation Ukrainian things, but much more so then, of course, the much more awareness, as you referred to, the seemingly a new wave of anti-French sentiments in North Africa, where French African countries, predominantly Northern African countries, feel that they're substantially marginalized and have been used by France. And to the extent that I actually found very, very interesting that apparently some of these French and leading countries, French African countries, were not only exploited, but they're under instructions that they're really not independent. I can't believe that this is happening today. If I was a member of the African Union, meaning that if I was president of the Republic of Uganda, I would table a motion at the African Union and I would start a real war to liberate French African countries. Just like, of course, I would have a continuous war, because I still have a continuous war of liberating English African countries from the throes of what the Museveni is doing, serving the interests of Western powers, the Pinetis, rather than serving the interests of Ugandans and Africans. No, I think we have an urgent job as Africans to mobilize young Africans like yourselves to begin asking the hard questions. By the way, for me, I'm very proud. I have a fantastic record. As early as primary school, I was singing anti-apartheid campaigns. As early as my primary schools, I knew what Cuba was, and I knew what America was, and I knew what China was. And as early as my early primary and secondary schools, as I said, I had a view about African liberations. That's why I know that Museveni is not a Pan-Africanist. That's why I know what Pan-Africanism is. And Pan-Africanism is not about an association of few African countries. African countries come together or sharing borders simply because somebody has a dated girl from Senegal, say I'm a Pan-Africanist. No, it's very much about African identity. All these are topics and conversations that we need to begin to have. And I think very urgently, young Africans like yourselves need to begin to have a debate about African resources, African identity together, African strategies, traditional in terms of African histories, but perhaps a visionary Africa, one in which we're able to say that, well, where are we going to be in the G20, where are we going to be as part of BRICS, and what is basically our roles, and when are we demanding for the African African nations to be included in the UN Security Council, and to do so in such a manner that if it's not resolved, that then when some European leader is coming to Kampala, that we have a demonstration that is guaranteed by national security to make sure that we have a placard saying, Africa must have a seat at the General Assembly. Because that is the citizen participation, which is democratic and citizen participation, that engages the majority of the young people. Because at the end of the day, I'd be very delighted if you ever become president of the Security Council. That is possible, particularly when you become president of the Security Council. Like Olaratun was president of the Security Council when President Obote was president and the UPC was in power and Museveni was in the bush. I would like to see you as president of the Security Council. I'd be very proud as a retired man in Nagongere. I'll give you a call from then. Will you pick up the call?
I will.
See?
I certainly will. Now, in light of all of these issues, and as they have happened, again, now, the interesting thing is, and which we have talked about, is that every part of Africa has a regional bloc. And of course, that's including also the umbrella, the African Union as a whole. Are we doing enough to avoid these things happening? Because the coups have happened in history, in Africa particularly, but we don't seem to be learning from them. What is it that we are not doing great?
I think good career. No, it's basically leadership, which is the problem on the continent at the moment. It's the leadership. I was trying to tell you that post neoliberal agenda push in the late 80s and early 90s, we ended up having Nyampalas as leaders. People were saying yes to London and Washington, and once London and Washington you're told to say yes, then you begin putting on suits, even if you're a military general like Museveni, serving their interests rather than serving our people. Basically, what is happening is, it could be a counter-revolutionary thing if you want to frame it in that way, that actually Africans are standing up to the failures of this group of leaders that we had in the last 20 or so years. Of course, from the soldier's perspective, in many cases, some scholars would argue that these guys reflect the views, opinions, and interests and the sentiments of the citizens. By and large, they do. The ones in Sudan, to an extent, they did, and only to the extent that Sudanese army is a highly politicized army, and that it is not unusual for them to work with the various political players, and they've done so. I must say, though, that the early independence coups, like in the two coups that happened in Uganda, the Idi Amin's coup was not designed by the Ugandan army, nor was it necessarily designed by Amin. Amin, as I've said, I've told this program, Amin was basically used by Israel, Anglo-America, basically, Britain, America, and Israel, to overthrow Milton Obote. And the overthrow was not because we're not providing the best. Of course, Obote one government was the best government this country has ever had since it was founded as the Republic of Uganda. But Amin was pushed because Obote wanted to get to arrest him because of his involvement in the so-called gold scandal in Congo, and partly because of killing Brigadier Okoya, as particularly those two. But the gold scandal thing was, we want to send this guy to support the liberation struggles in Congo, but not to participate in the gold deal that he was involved in. And of course, Obote's enemies abroad, using the intelligence networks, picked this information, gave it to Obote's opposition in Uganda. And I say Obote's because it was very much postularized around Obote, that you see these guys are looting there. Thankfully, of course, Parliament investigates this and finds that Obote was not involved. But Amin was. But of course, Amin had been authorized to go in Congo by Obote. But Obote didn't send Amin to go and loot. Amin sent Obote to do this thing. So Obote was cleared out of this. But so Obote now wanted to have Amin done for that. But number two, of course, of the killing of Brigadier Okoya. Then, of course, these guys tell Amin that, look, when Obote returns from Singapore, where Obote was a thorn to them anyway, he's coming to arrest you. So, but you can help you to deal with him before he deals with you. And basically, that's what happened. And in Obote's case, it was, one, Uganda's moved to the left, and the radical economic programs of the Commons Man, aligned with the Commons Man's Charter, was in tune, and Anglo-America were not happy with it. Of course, our role in the Sudan was very radically so, because, in Congo, because we're supporting Lumumbists, whom these guys had killed. I don't know how people clap for Patrice Lumumba, but they don't want to clap for UPC, because I don't think you get that angle. So basically, we were genuinely linked to these people. And then, of course, the question of Sudan, where Israel wanted us to play a particular role on Egypt, basically as a counter to countering Egypt, possibly on should there be another equivalent of 1967 war, but it took a different view. But most important, what was a pain on the neck for these guys on the liberation struggles in East Africa and Southern Africa, particularly being as the spokesperson of the anti-apartheid campaign. I'm saying all this, that all these are the things that normally happen, that happened. Then you bring it to Idi Amin, and people simply think it is about Amin. And, Uganda, the ban was a dictator. That's the thing. So that was one. But was it so there for local? It wasn't. And it was about big powers, and then, of course, our economic positions. The rest of many of these coups, that's basically why I'm giving that background, are not necessarily big things and big name things like that. Sometimes superpowers will use some of these individual soldiers to push their interests. In the cases of the more recent times, of course, some of these generals in those countries, the soldiers in these countries, are used by conduits by sometimes foreign intelligence. There is the suggestion that possibly Russia may be having an interest in using many of these guys. I don't think it's completely that.
It's getting a red carpet.
Indeed, but I think the bigger thing is less about Russia. But it is also true, because you asked me about foreign influence. It is generally the case that it's less about Russia pushing, but more about these guys having an anti-French sentiments based on the exploitation of France by others. And then, of course, it's actually ironical that the Nigerian leader, who seems to be pushing for this, is basically being used, almost blackmailed by America, that he either does so because for him he won a controversial election in recent times, and he's got cases in the U.S. which basically, if things went against him, or if he's not supported by these guys, he can be exposed as dry, and that means he can lose his presidency before he even commences. So it's basically that. But finally, then, of course, some of these guys thought that it might be as easy, particularly in Niger, when Niger was being threatened, as it was in the Gambia. Once all of a sudden these guys realized that no, it's not, as you rightly said earlier, it's not only Niger, because Burkina Faso is saying, you touch Niger, you touch us. So Mali is there, Burkina Faso is there, now Gabon is there.
I don't even see how Gabon enters this, because its issues are quite unique.
No, but of course, unique in what way?
Because
Bongo has been in power just a few years longer than Museveni.
No, no, Bongo himself, the early Bongo has only been there since 2009, except for the fact that, of course, his father had been there since 1967 until his death. But the coup does not really seem to hinge on the same problems as any other West African countries. The others have been facing those insurgencies from the Islamist forces. Gabon has not necessarily been in the same situation.
But I get your point. No, but it's not necessarily the case. These matters will normally listed. I mean, listed an impressive 10 points or 9 points against Obote. Of course, all of them were nonsense, because I mean, he's a criminal who was a wanted man. When Obote returned from Singapore, he was supposed to get him and take him to Luzira, kind of stuff. So no, these guys will give reasons, they will give justifications. I have said of Gabon, in fact of Niger, that for the first time since I was born, except for later reluctantly supporting Thomas Sankara, reluctantly, because of the proclamation he was making, I have never supported any military regime or military coup. And by the way, I want to say this in conclusion, that whatever else we say, there is no circumstance in which young Africans should get excited and begin to say that military coups are panacea to their future. No. Like David Oyetojok said to us as young people in 1983, you can see how old I am, so you better call me Mzee, that look, he told us at the International Conference Center, then on a National Youth Day celebration, and those are genuine National Youth Day celebrations, unlike the fudge that happens these days. And he was saying that, look, after Idi Amin, he was saying, never again should you, the youth of this country, ever be persuaded that a military man should come and rule you. And said never, not even me. David Oyetojok. The point he was making, and I'll tell you, was that, look, we are soldiers, we are trained to kill.
Yes.
Our jobs are to defend our territorial integrity. He was saying that leaders should be democratic. Of course, by the end of the day, it doesn't stop a military man who's retired, retires and then joins politics to come. But he was simply saying that government should be civilian, should not be military-led state, kind of stuff. Basically, that's the point he was trying to say. And I was saying not even me, David, to joke, which is very important. So you, the youth of Africa, should actually demand for institutional revolution so that you have health systems that work, education system that works, the government departments that work, police services that work, the judiciary that work, and above all, political parties that are real and are not pockets for change that work, and above all, when national elections do take place, we should make sure that political parties compete freely, fairly, and you guys in the media give them equitable spaces, and national broadcasters in Uganda's case, like Uganda Television and Radio Uganda, and then Urban Television as public broadcasters, they should give equal and fair time, and they should stop thinking that when they call Ochieno to participate on their programs, they're doing a favor to us. So they should do that. So once that happens, citizens should have the opportunity to freely determine, after testing leaders and political parties, elect a majority political party of their choice. And once those parties are elected, they should go out down there to serve. That is what this continent needs. The more that is done, the more competition of ideas will determine who is the leader. And the more it will become apparent that when a political party comes into government, they are under pressure because the public are watching them, so that then they're able to serve. And so they're able to invest in the people, invest in our infrastructure, invest in our future, serve us as citizens, you young Ugandans, so that you have a guarantee of a future in 50 years' time that you'll be a Mzee like me, free and safe and with access to decent services and able to look at your grandchildren. That is what we need to do. And the more that is done, the more it becomes impossible for some funny crooked soldier coming, boasting, tuku. Me have come to take over because, President Princess, behind the camera, has not done her good job as President of the Republic. So we've taken her over from her and we're taking charge. Basically, that's my point. So unless we're able to do those, then these things will continue. And actually, if we want these things to stop, we need to be able to do exactly what I'm talking about. And then finally, we also need to culturally do these things. I use Britain, where Museveni confined me reluctantly. Museveni, I've forgiven you. So in Britain, the idea that a member of parliament serves and then retires and they think their son or daughter, sometimes some of them are not particularly beautiful people, coming to replace them, are unheard of. That's one. Britain, then after that, somebody's prime minister, I know people will always talk about the Bushes in America. The NRA guys like to pick and choose when it serves them. But I'm talking about Britain, that you're from a former prime minister's family and you think you're going to be the next leader. No. And then finally, actually in Britain, normally if you come from the elite Oxbridge, meaning particularly the elite Eton, like me, Ochieno, I keep on boasting what my Mwiri, that the elite schools and then you multi-billionaires, you go into politics, they don't pick you. It's now ironically they have a billionaire prime minister, quite strangely from a conservative, but as a matter of principle and tradition, they don't like so-called billionaires because they say you're out of touch. But not necessarily that they want ordinary people, whatever. No, but that's as a matter of principle. I'm saying Africans need to wake up and learn this. Maybe we need to create a situation in which African citizens begin to pick Roger because they know that's a modest guy from Chiboga. He grew up, he went to Nakaseke Secondary School. He's one of us. He knows what our livelihood is all about, what life's all about. Okay, granted, he went and studied and worked with the Ochienos. He's got privilege. Once in a while, he rides in Ochieno's helicopter. But his background and, his livelihood is this. And when you're given an opportunity to do that, they test that you've not lost touch with them. So generally, those guys are not jealous about power and privilege. But they want to know and get assurances that you know their lives and livelihoods and that you practice and live with it. One of the most popular politicians in Britain is Jeremy Corbyn. I keep referring to him because he's a friend and because somebody I look up to. The guy has been a member of parliament like for Yonkers, but the guy speaks the language, messes with the common, and pushes for those agendas. Those are what, by and large, we need to do. So when we do that, where do you get space for a terror organization to infiltrate, to be part of you? You know, the majority of the citizens will be against you, but they will not give you the space. That's basically the point I'm trying to make. So with the exception, therefore, that organization that we don't have direct influence about, maybe the Islamic State and many of these other organizations, you know, those have been brought from elsewhere. But even those, it will be very difficult for those kind of organizations to infiltrate, to penetrate our communities, because they're not, because these are ideologies, you know, and if there is no space for them, in my opinion, they will not apply.
And I want to get to this, I wanted to speak to this issue just as well, before we conclude, time is going. I wanted you to, now that you're speaking about Africa as a whole, and you did hint about it, us being a part of the G20. Some people have welcomed it with open arms, saying, at least we've gotten our foot in the door, and we can try and see whatever comes out of it. From your perspective as someone who has been in these spaces, one who also analyzes the situation and can sort of make sense out of it, what do you think as Africa as a whole we need to we earn from being a part of the G20? Does that mean the economic structures, the global economic structures, does favor us much better than it used to, or what is it in it for us?
I will clap when Africa gets its permanent seat at the United Nations. I'm still not sure how that will work. I possibly think, actually, that the United Nations Security Council should be radically reformed, so that maybe they end up with 10 seats, in which case possible Africa actually desires up to 2 seats, perhaps. But even then, it will at least be an Africa voice in the Security Council. That would be much more exciting to me. Number two, and whether that permanent seat is a particular African nation state, whether South Africa, or Egypt, or possibly Nigeria, because those are nations that can have grounds, relative grounds to argue to take the slots. Particularly, Egypt seems to be. Egypt and Nigeria seems to be the competing candidates. But whatever the formula, but perhaps then in which case then when you go to real Africa, there's possibly, without prejudice, native Africa, probably South Africa and Nigeria. That's one. But number two, actually the emergence of BRICS recently.
Yeah.
To me, is a much more exciting proposition for the continent as an alternative arrangement, an alternative economic formula, a possibility of an alternative economic and political voice, including one that may challenge the dollar domination.
And I am glad you brought that just a little bit. Do you think the BRICS and that whole organization as it is now, especially since they've allowed some of them, it seems to just be geopolitically competing against the G7, which, give or take, is one or two things. Do you think still Africa does benefit from it? Because at the end of the day, the original founders seem to be dominating most of it.
And I know South Africa came later, but from the acronym, Africa is one of the founding members of South Africa.
South Africa sort of joined later. Originally it was
indeed, but I think then we want to break our legs until we are at the top. No, we cannot undermine ourselves in this way. I told you that every time you talk Lumumba, you should thank Obote and UPC and Uganda, because at least we contributed. Just like every time you talk about anti-apartheid, we should be praising Uganda and UPC and Obote. Museveni these days really wants to praise themselves about the latter bit of the South African Sizwe, the latter bit of their presence here. No, we should just do these things from factual history. Look, the BRICS thing, we should not give ourselves less credit than we deserve. Is a much more important arrangement development if it succeeds. Because while you quickly go and talk about its perceived downside, that is an anti-West thing, it's basically an alternative economic model. And then you talk about the G20. It's basically about the spacing for nation states, groups, and treaties and organizations, and the spaces in terms of markets, operations, and how you work out yourselves. And basically, if it is politics, then may it be at least an alternative voice that gives us space to think. But as Africans, what are we anyway? You see? At the end of the day, we can't have it both ways. Okay, in the absence of the BRICS, what did we achieve thus far? What did we get from the G7?
There wasn't.
You know,
the G7 seems to not have been ours.
So basically, so is the G20 ours? No, the G20 has been from the G7. I think then there's a thought that okay, let's expand to the next level. You know, considering that Uganda is one of the poorest countries in the world, you know, HIPIC, you know, when they talk about the HIPIC things, Museveni wants us to celebrate middle income. I don't know whether middle income is going to come. So we are amongst the poorest of the poor. So this G20 membership thing in Uganda will never be. So I think it's a wasted space for conversation, but it's important. We need to be ambitious enough. Uganda, if it was under UPC administration, the trajectory we had from the early 60s and the 80s and 771. And in fact, the trajectory we had from between 1981 and 84, particularly in terms of economic advancement, if we maintained that, we would be qualifying member for the G20. Because actually what we've done is that according to World Health Organization, you talk about the Millennium Development Goals, the targets, all this kind of stuff, would have been meeting them because we would be, right now, we would be one of the highest literacy on the continent. In fact, Uganda would possibly under UPC would be amongst the top 5, certainly possibly about the top 3 actually at the moment. Would have been the first country to implement universal primary education. Remember? We were going to do it in 1972. Did you know that? Uganda and UPC, we are going to implement universal primary education in 1972. You know, and when we came back in 1980, from 1981, we were going to implement universal primary education in 1991. And it was with quality UPC, UPE equivalent. You see what I'm saying? And so then after that, then we do universal secondary education. And we had already done the groundwork for universal secondary education. I'm answering you. We had already done groundwork for universal secondary education. Do you know what we did? In Obote 2, from 1981, 82, 83, 84, we opened up secondary schools, government secondary schools in every sub-country. Do you know that?
No.
Every sub-country had a secondary school and or a teacher training school and or a technical school, technical education. Now, Gongora, we had 2, a teacher training school, National Teachers College, now part of a university, and Mahanga Primary School. One other parish, or sub-country, Paya, had 2, a secondary school and a teacher training and a technical institution. Meaning, as we expanded this, over a 10-year period, once built like the equivalent of the schools I talked about, the Nabisuza, Torogas of these days, you know, we're going to, in other words, Uganda was going to be so highly advanced in education and health that we don't know where our economy would have gone. Shh. In which case, the G20 thing would be neither here nor there. I'm saying that these are the more important things. What is our indices? What is our investments in terms of infrastructure as a continent? What's our investment in terms of agriculture? How much poverty have we killed? How much jobs have we created? How much research have we done? In others, how many of our universities rank where in terms of world class in terms of research? I was discussing with somebody the other day who agreed with me that the Uganda Trypanosomiasis Research Center, Tororo, UTRO, was a research center of excellence on the continent. It's now a slum in Tororo. You know, there are some guys who basically need to be taken to prison. If those had been done, I argued that that research center would have almost certainly provided an alternative to medical staff for COVID. I can go on and on. Those are the more things Africa need to be talking about, rather than whether or not we've graduated the G20. And the G20 will be observers, almost like how people line up to go and meet Putin and to meet Trump.
There's Alan Sosa says he agrees with you 100%. There's Ethan Munoz following from Ankara. And for everyone else who's there, you just drop in where you're following us from, and if you have a question, you can also put it there. But this one also says, I can't wait to hear how the African Union will ensure that its participation in the G20 does not reinforce existing global power imbalance, but instead promotes a more equitable world order.
That's true. I don't know what African Union is going to say. Because I think some of these things will just be about a waste of money. But no, some of these things are psychological presence. And I'm also yet to wait to be persuaded onto what basically G20 will be doing. No, what we need to do as a continent, I keep on repeating this, we just need, as a continent, we need to invest in peace. Yeah? We basically need to invest in peace. We need to invest in democracy. We need to invest in basic rule of law, meaning our people, citizens across this continent need to wake up, with guaranteed health, and need to go to bed with guaranteed security. Number two, we need to invest in our girl child, and we need to invest in our girl children, and we need to enable our younger women to aspire for in positions of leadership and to need to excel in academia. That's what we need to do. But we need to make sure that young girls and young women, and for you, a young man, when you're having a young family, that when they get pregnant, there's a possibility, they have a guarantee of their 9 months of pregnancy generally, and that after that, there is a guarantee for their childbirth. So we need to kill this thing about women are dying for basically during birth, and that our children, when our children are born, there's a guarantee for those children, to live up to the beyond 5 and to go to schools and get education. That's what we need to do. We need to basically invest in our agriculture so that we're able to feed ourselves as a continent. We need to stop lining up ourselves. Can you imagine 54 countries lining up because they want wheat from Ukraine? It's a shambolic shame. Those are the things that we need to do. And so we need to invest in technology also, and as I said, where our engineers since independence. So basically, this continent needs to do that. And by the time when we do that, we need to trade more with ourselves and begin to sell our surpluses elsewhere. When we're able to begin to have some surpluses to sell elsewhere, whether it's a G20 or we're selling it to Noro or wherever, and they're excellent stuff, no, they'll market themselves. These organizations are less important. What's important is this continent. Let's not divert from the fact that security should be guaranteeing the fact that agricultural staff reach Kampala from Tungama.
I think what you've said answers this. This one, Ethan, asks, what strategies can the African Union employ to ensure that it has a meaningful and influential voice within the G20, considering the historical underrepresentation of the African nations in global forums? So I think that sort of answers that. But there's also this last one. It says, will the African Union's participation in the G20 spark renewed discussions about broader reforms of international institutions, including the United Nations and the World Trade Organization, to better reflect the changing global landscape?
It will, and I hope it does, and I think that's a very important question. Those are the things that we need to be able to do. So I think we cannot talk about G20 in isolation. As I said, we must talk about the whatever global organization we're involved with to must be linked to the reform of the United Nations, and then the related organizations, including the World Trade Organization. But I said, even World Trade Organization, even if there are reforms there, what will Uganda be selling? Stolen fish?
No, but
fair enough, yeah.
Being a member of that, if I can try to attempt to defend, I think the problem we have generally had is that we have had unfair policies on both ends. The policies that work on some of the global north does not necessarily work here. So maybe our participation and membership in some of those forums like the World Trade Organization does consider the diversity in approach and
I totally agree with the World Trade Organization, but I don't see how that relates to the G20.
And no, what I think the question is that he hopes...
No, I agree with him, yes.
That the G20 will sort of influence, because again, the problem with the G20 is that it also doesn't have structural enforcement mechanism, so it can only be...
No, it doesn't. And again, I will come back home. It does. We need to sort out our houses, So as I said, institutionally, as nation states, we need to be able to have these conversations, including actually this G20. This is a conversation that we should have from as well as schools, as I said, but schools, political parties, civil society organizations, and media houses like yourselves. And then, as I said, political parties should be challenged. Political party leaders should be challenged. I don't know how many you should challenge them in terms of their views and opinions. At least for me, I'm defending UPC the way. No, forget about whatever those other rebels, whatever they are, kind of stuff. So we do that. But then beyond that, as I said, what is our position as the East African community? What are we benefiting from? As we just discussed that before. Exactly. And then as African Union. So who are really the real leaders on the African continent today, meaning serious leaders. Forget about the African Union as a body, but across Africa as an African Union, when our heads of state and government go and sit in Addis Ababa, what do they talk about? What are the big things? As I said, now coups happen, and then the guys say, you've been banned. But, whom are you saying? Like the Nigerian guy said, you're saying you've been banned, but when opposition activists were being beaten, you were quiet. When citizens are disappearing, you're quiet. When children are dying because of lack of basic medical facilities, you're quiet. So when maybe certain groups of citizens, in this case soldiers, stand up and take a position, then you say you're banning them. That's why I told you that for the first time I'm beginning to listen to these guys. But like I said, I warned you African youth, no, the coups are not the answer. The answer is you guys taking up much more interest in the destiny of our nation states by putting pressure on our political leaders, but also you guys getting much more involved directly, in the political process, and just having these much more sensible conversations about our position in global agencies like the World Trade Organizations, and then another organization which is becoming irrelevant is the non-aligned movement, which again we found members. Part of the non-aligned movement was that groups of nations that would say that, well, we're not going to be taking instruction from London and Washington, or indeed, in this case, from big powers, whether it's Russia or China. That organization, I don't know what it does talk about these days, but things like that. But these are conversations that young Africans ought to be able to have. And as I said, young Africans ought to put pressure on their governments, just as they should be putting pressure and having interest in regional organizations. And
and you can't conclude altogether because the time.
That they must make sure that the African Union, I think African Union also needs to be reformed. I think we should ban the name African Union, take it back to the organization African Unity. Maybe there will be some nostalgia. People will be compelled to read notes of the then founding members of the organization African Union. Because these guys at least were much more serious. I mean, in my opinion, they're much more serious. And yet they had bigger challenges. They had bigger challenges because it was Cold War. They had bigger challenges because most of those leaders were targets, particularly of Western interest, because these guys were fighting for the liberation of Africa as a continent. Once we were liberated in the one day way politically, generally, so that now we only have client heads of state rather than those dubious guys. And you wonder what, by and large, we've done with it. So I think that whatever we are discussing, when it comes to the question of the security of the African peoples, it should not necessarily be confined to the question of terrorism. But terrorism is something that we must reject, and all of us must rally around. And terrorism is bad. It creates fear among citizens. It means that economies get slow.
Yeah.
And like in the Ugandan case, when you say that, don't go into crowded places, and then people fear going to places of worship, people fear going to businesses generally.
Good, yeah.
It is crude, and post-COVID, it's not something that we should all stand against. But to do so, our government should take responsibility and make sure that they inform us, give us reasonable information about the grievances that may be leading to this question of terror. And if they're political, they should be resolved amicably politically. But if they're not, they should be exposed. Where it's case that has been assumed that a conversation about Islamic State and others, I didn't answer you directly. These things that come from afar, many of those will also be dependent on what foreign policy positions we take. And so, as a country, Uganda, I reject the idea that we should continue fighting other people's wars. The only war that we supported and I supported was War of African Liberation, that we did, and liberation struggles in Southern Africa, and we concluded that. And any other wars that's happening at the moment, we should participate as forces contributing as being part of the solution rather than being part of the problem. I still believe that at the moment, Uganda is involved in many other countries for the interests of Mr. Museveni and some of Mr. Museveni's foreign friends, rather than in the interest of Africa. I don't know any other involvement in Africa, outside Uganda, that we are involved in, which is strictly for strategic interest of this country versus strategic interest of the continent. Strategic interest of this country is not about people or particular groups of people or political party. Strategic people, meaning Uganda's national strategic interest, I don't know. It is none. Nor do I know of one which is Africa's geopolitical strategic interests? None. In many of them, it's about self-interest and self-interest. And I think the time is now really for us to review those positions. And the more we do that, the more then we'll be able to expose the forces of terror, whoever they are.
All right. Thank you so much, sir. I do appreciate you for making the time. And for me as an individual to conclude just as much, we might just run to becoming part of the BRICS or the G20 or even the UN as it is. But I also think that we need to create a value, first of all, for ourselves before we expect a value from the other institutions. And I think that is why we still don't get as much bargaining power, because we don't present so much on the table. And so unless we wake up to that effect, we will still be taken advantage of, and at the end of the day, we won't even benefit from being a part of this institution. So thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for being with us. Thank you, folks, for joining us from wherever you're joining us. Those who ask questions, I do appreciate you. You are the reason why we're here. I hope that you learned one or two things, and that next time maybe we can also learn from you. So if you still have a question and I didn't read it, or you still can come, if you watch this much later, you can still drop the question, and then we'll see if we'll be able to address it in the next hotline show, which happens every Monday from 7 to 9 p.m. Here in East African time. And so that is all I have. I want to thank the people who have worked with, Lillian on the camera, a gentleman, Ali and Arnold in this control room, and every other person who has made it a point to be a part of this initiative to make this show possible, and every other initiative. Thank you so much. Have yourselves a very good night.
The Alternative Digitalk. Real issues, real talk.